92,870 people, 92,870 sentences, 92,870 stories. This is the number of people affected by our federal mandatory minimum sentencing laws in the United States. In this speech, I will be explaining our federal mandatory minimum sentencing laws and the reasons that we should repeal them. As college students, we are new to the world of government and politics, so I think it's really important for us to understand how our justice system works, especially since a lot of us just filled out our tax returns and we're going to be voting for the first time in November. And also, I've always had such an interest in the U.S. government and the federal justice system, so this topic is really important to me. The establishment of federal mandatory minimum sentencing laws in regards to drugs in the United States has taken the power away from our justice system, overfilled federal prisons, and abused taxpayer dollars for years, which is why we should repeal the laws and let the justice system run its course. So what even are federal minimum sentencing laws in the United States? According to the United States Sentencing Commission, a mandatory minimum penalty is the imposition of a specified minimum term of imprisonment, assuming that the defendant has met the specified criteria. Some examples of this in the United States are in regards to offenses with drugs, firearms, child sexual exploitation, and identity theft. The U.S. Sentencing Commission has provided some data regarding drug-related minimum sentencing in 2016. First, 46.8% of drug offenders have been convicted of an offense with a mandatory minimum sentence. Half of those convicted had received a minimum of 125 months, which is almost 10 and a half years. In contrast to non-mandatory minimum sentences cases that only had 39 months, or slightly over 3 years, attached. And 62.7% of crack cocaine cases and 27.8% of marijuana cases in 2016 resulted in a mandatory minimum sentence. So now that you know what the mandatory minimum sentencing laws are in regards to drug use, let's move on to what the problems with these laws are. A group called Reform Georgia argues that these laws take power away from our federal judges. In Federalist Number 78, Alexander Hamilton, who is one of our founding fathers, states that judges are the ultimate arbiters in regards to all constitutional questions. From the founding of our country, our founding fathers believed that our judges have the final say in a sentencing. These mandatory laws that establish the minimum amount of time that someone should be in prison take away that power from the judges. And while the government is based on checks and balances, where each branch keeps the other two in line, this establishment of this minimum sentence is crossing the line for the legislative branch because it takes away power from the judicial branch to do its job. Besides taking away judicial power, mandatory sentencing also increases the number of prisoners that are incarcerated. According to Louise Gale, a writer for Vitana.org, mandatory minimum sentencing laws come with high amounts of taxpayer dollars. The Vera Institute of Justice discovered that the average taxpayer cost per inmate care is over $31,000 per year. The mandatory sentencing laws only add to this number by increasing the amount of time that certain inmates are in prison. The U.S. court stated in 2016 that the number of federal prison inmates convicted under these laws has decreased since 2010, but there are still 92,800 inmates committed. This government has been easing some of the more stringent penalties for drug violations in recent years, which is a good start. Hopefully this trend will continue into the elimination of the sentencing policies so that the federal courts can do their jobs. In addition to requiring high amounts of taxpayer dollars, these laws also do not take extenuating circumstances into consideration. Certain crimes definitely do deserve the long sentences mandated by the federal government, but these sentences do not take into consideration extenuating circumstances. Every case is different. This goes back to the previous argument that the judge and jury should be in control of the length of a sentence, so that each specific detail of the case can be taken into consideration when determining a length. According to Antonia Farzan with the Washington Post, in 2010, Patricia Spotted Crow was sentenced to 12 years in prison for $31 worth of marijuana. Patricia had had some financial troubles in the past that had led her to lose her house. This was her first offense, yet because of her minimum sentencing laws, she was incarcerated for 10 years for distribution and 2 years for possession. The judge had zero say in this matter, as these were the guidelines set up by the federal government in regards to drug possession. While it would be ideal to be able to repeal all of the minimum sentencing laws, this is a difficult step to take because of the large number of these laws enacted in state and federal laws. Therefore, I am advocating for the repeal of minimum sentencing for laws in regards to drug cases. In Patricia's case, she was charged with a 10-year minimum for selling a small amount of drugs. This would put more reliance on the court system to do its job. And some people may argue that these laws are necessary to discourage crime and to prevent personal bias in the justice system, but they do not take into account the individual circumstances regarding each case, as can be seen with Patricia. I'm not saying that these crimes should not be punished. They definitely should be. I am arguing that we should remove the minimum sentences attached to allow the justice system to run its course. In conclusion, I would like to repeal minimum sentencing laws in regards to drug cases and leave sentencing up to the court systems, which would allow for individual extenuating circumstance to be taken into consideration and save on taxpayer dollars each year. 92,870 lives could be affected by this change. 92,870. Thank you.